Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey everybody, this is Brian back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me Stephani Grace. And Stephani is an author. She's a motivational speaker. She's a therapist. She's a mindfulness expert. And her book is called Creating Real Happiness A to Z, which is a mindful guide to discovering, loving, and accepting your true self. And that, I believe, is out now. Is that true, Stephani?
Yeah, it's out now as of May 1st.
All right. Yeah. So I thought, so when I actually got your bio, it was coming out this month. So with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Stephani Grace.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah. It's good to have you, Stephani. I always like to start off by letting my listeners get to know the person that we're talking to a little bit more. So tell me about yourself. Where do you live? What are your hobbies? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I am newly a empty nester. So I was a single mom for 11 years and my daughter just went off to college. So that's been a big transition for me this year. And I recently bought a house in Mexico. So I've been kind of going back and forth and enjoying the sunshine there and love the ocean and water. And here I have my private practice. I'm a mental health therapist, but because of COVID, I've been doing all my appointments online. So now, even though my practice has been based in Oregon, I can see people anywhere. But I spend a majority of my time here. And yeah, that's
sounds like an exciting time in your life. A couple of transitions going on there.
Yeah, some major transitions. Yeah, it's a little bit bigger of a transition than I was anticipating, learning to kind of have all this freedom that people think, oh, it's such a gift, which it is, but it's also a big shift, to go from kind of having your focus be your child to then all of a sudden being like, whoa, what do I do with all this free time? Or
yeah,
I can focus on me.
Yeah, being a parent, for me, is all consuming. And I remember when my oldest daughter went off to college, I wouldn't even say bittersweet. I missed her. So I don't know how you feel about it, but that was tough for me.
Yeah, totally. Oh my gosh, I miss her. So last time I saw her was January. So the thing is that of course you want your child, and I'm so grateful that she is thriving and doing well, and it makes me so happy, and I want her to be independent. But also my heart misses her, and I miss that, the time that we had together and that she was in my house and a part of my everyday life, and now it isn't. It's a tricky thing. So my heart goes out to all the parents who, have to learn how to deal with that loss. Yeah.
So tell me, how did you get into mental health therapy?
Well, I think how I really got into it is from my own work. I just found spirituality and psychology just fascinating. I feel like, since I left home and went to college, I've just been voraciously attracted to reading spiritual books and books on psychology and things like that. And so I think, I was just drawn to that work, and through my own healing work, really felt called to help other people be able to heal and know their truth. And that's really what got me on this path. I have never felt like anything else was meant for me than this, really.
That's good. That's good that you know kind of what your calling was. And I know you mentioned the word healing, and we talk a lot about healing, and my show is Grief to Growth. But tell me about, what is it that you think we have to heal from?
Well, I think for everybody, it probably varies, but I think what we all have in common is that, we are all divine beings. And I think that the piece that we all have in common is that we all experience conditioning from our society. And I guess when I say healing from that, that's what I'm referring to, is that, we need to unlearn the conditioning that we've gotten from our families and society and the world, so that we can come back to knowing what our truth is. Because it is, I think, profound suffering to think we are something other than divine or our truth, to think that we are our conditioning. That causes us a lot of suffering, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it's funny because it's something I came to later in life. I knew that I had been wounded. I didn't realize that it seems like it's a universal thing.
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, it's interesting. I was talking with someone the other day who asked me about this. She said, "Well, I think I know some people who didn't have wounding in their childhood, and they are amazing, enlightened beings. And why do you think that is?" And I was, I said, "Well, that's an interesting question, because I think it is possible, and I don't know the answer to that. I mean, maybe there are people who come here." And already have done all their work and they just get to enjoy this lifetime. But I do believe that most of us come here to do important work. Like, we have healing work to do. I believe that the goal of the healing is to come back to our truth, to know that we are love, and to learn to love each other and share love. And so if you come here already knowing that, that's really cool. But I think it's probably pretty rare.
So I was going to say, have you met any of these people?
I haven't myself, and
Yeah.
I've been a therapist for almost 22 years now, you know.
Yeah, I think we do come in knowing who we are, but I think the world kind of beats it out of us, for lack of a better word. We do get this conditioning that says that we're something less than that.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even I think people who are profoundly enlightened, like, Thich Nhat Hanh, in his book, oh gosh, I'm just going to escape my mind now, but the one where he talks about healing your inner child, he talks about even people who come from families that, where they didn't have profound suffering, just from being the mere fact of being here in the world, we get conditioning or wounding that requires us to heal our inner child.
Yeah, as you said that, I was thinking about myself, and I remember one of my earliest memories. I was born in 1961, so I remember seeing the Vietnam War, on TV, and thinking, what kind of a world is this when people are killing each other? And this was not wounding for my parents. This was just looking at the world and saying, this place is insane.
Right. Exactly. I mean, so that's the thing. Even if you have good parents, you might have struggles, with friendships, right? You might get bullied or excluded. Or it's interesting how each of us gets wounding that is very unique to us, but really leaves scars or causes us to have beliefs that we are other than we are, you know?
Right. So I know, and I was looking at some of your work earlier, and you use the term ego, which is a loaded term. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the ego. So first, I'd like for you to define what ego is and tell me how that's different from your true self.
Yeah, 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 you're right. It is, it can be very confusing, that term. When I use the term ego, what I'm referring to is the conditioned self. And so I use those two interchangeably, and often I will say the conditioned self rather than the ego, because I do think that the ego can be confusing. The important thing I like people to know about the ego is that the ego is a part of you. And so I think oftentimes I hear people saying, like, kill the ego or hate the ego, but we will never be free from our conditioning or our ego through hate or rejection or, anything like that. The key to your freedom is by embracing and learning how to give your ego or conditioned self what it needs in order to integrate. And your ego is really developed out of fear, out of keeping you safe. So its mission is really so you can empathize. It's like it's trying to help you. It's like, do this and people will love you. Do this, people will accept you. Oh, don't do that. Everything that it's doing for you, even though it's doing it in a way that's usually very critical and mean, is designed to keep you safe and getting your needs met. So that's the ego. The true self is, you is love. You were born as your true self, as a divine being, and your true self is nothing but love and would never treat you in a way that is anything but loving and love. And so you're in ego or your conditioning if you're experiencing anything other than that. Right. And so coming back to your truth, or even knowing that there's these two parts to you, is I think the key to freedom and happiness is a lot of people don't even realize there are two parts. They're walking around in their conditioning or their ego, thinking that that's their truth, thinking that they may not even be aware of that their conditioning is mean or causing them suffering. They just think that's their truth.
Yeah, I completely can agree with that. So I'm curious because I don't hear a lot of mental health therapists speaking in language that you use. Is this something you learned in school, or is this something you brought along with you?
Yeah, definitely not something I learned in school. Yeah, it's interesting. This is just for my own journey and my path on the path to um, my own healing and just being a seeker. I feel that I'm a voracious seeker and kind of, wanting to learn all of this. I've just been, as early as I can remember, kind of curious about all of this kind of stuff, and have come to know this through my own research and work on myself, and then know now that this is the only way for people to heal and truly be happy, which is why this is the way that I work with people. And yeah, I think there might be some places where, their schools or teaching for therapists might be mindfulness based. That's what I say when people ask me how I work with people. I say that my work is very mindfulness based.
Yeah, I would say your work is spiritual. I hope
Spiritual.
that works for you. Works for you. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, and I find it refreshing, frankly, because I do know a few people. I know someone who's actually a psychiatrist who speaks in this type of language, and my belief is that that's the only thing that's going to heal us is really understanding who we truly are. I was just talking with someone earlier today. I was doing an interview, and I'm like, this is the key to everything. And I think Western medicine is kind of beating that out of a lot of mental health professionals that don't have that perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And it's interesting because this is how I show up for people. And I will tell you, sometimes people are scared of the fact that it may feel too spiritual. But here's the interesting thing. It hardly anyone is scared away because it resonates with them on some level. They know that what I'm speaking is the truth and they hear it somewhere in their body. And the thing is that people come to me because they're tired of suffering and they want to find freedom from that. And I think they believe me. I am a very passionate person. You can tell that when I'm speaking the truth. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think people think, ooh, okay, maybe she knows something. Maybe I'm going to give it a try,
Yeah, I think that's awesome, and there is some fear of being labeled spiritual or being woo woo. I'm going through a training thing right now, and it's I think it's extremely spiritually based, but they've taken other language to make it sound very scientific and everything, which is great. I don't mind that, but I like the fact that you don't shy away from that because I think, like you said, people, we kind of know on a certain level, maybe on a subconscious level, we know that what we're looking at is crazy. And we know that there's got to be a different way to do life. And so they come seeking someone like yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and if people don't, excuse me, if they don't like the terms I use, so if I throw something out, it people feel repulsed by, like, so I have a lot of clients who don't like the word God, things like that. Then I say, fine, let's choose a word you like. If you choose a word you feel comfortable with, let's put it in there. You can choose any language you like, and even sometimes I have people, one of my favorite practices is gratitude practice because it focuses on what's working. And it's something that I always tell people, if you're only going to do one thing, that I recommend do that because it's easy. You can do it just in your mind. You can pair it with something you're already doing. But if you don't like the word gratitude because it feels too spiritual or godly to you, then use what's working practice. Say, okay, let's do your what's working practice every day.
Interesting. Well, it's funny. I want to pursue that because you bring up gratitude. Because again, I was just talking with someone earlier about this idea of gratitude, and frankly, I heard it probably 5 or 6 years ago. I was very resistant to it. I'm like, this is crazy. This is not going to work. And I can tell you, after having practiced it for several years, I am a real believer. So, why is it you think the gratitude is so important?
Well, I think that what it does is it shifts your focus to, first of all, what's working. And then it begins to help you with self-love and hope and things like that, because you feel that you are worthy because what you're focusing on is is what's working. And then it makes you feel like, oh, well, things can work out for me, or things can get better, because that's what your brain is focusing on. You're no longer focusing on what isn't working or what will go wrong. It's just very simple, but it helps you to just realize what you have and what's working. And I mean, the number one thing I get from people when I ask them to do gratitude practice is that, well, I just say the same things every day and then I get tired of it and I don't want to do it anymore.
Mm.
So here's the thing. First of all, okay, well, if you're grateful for the same things every day, okay, be grateful for the same things every day. That's okay. But the more that you do it, the more that you'll find that there's even more to be grateful for. And I often ask people to pair it with something. So for example, pair it with when you walk your dog, if you have a dog. Then when you're out in the world, it changes your perspective because you're out in the world and you're walking. And then maybe you'll be like me in Portland, Oregon. Oh my God, I'm so thankful that the sky is blue right now, or that the sun's shining. And then, oh, it's spring and look at all these beautiful flowers. And maybe you run into another dog owner and they're very kind, or, you get to see some cute animals, who knows, but they're all of a sudden, because you're in that way of thinking, you start to notice even more that you can be grateful for. And you can try it out as a scientific experiment. But if you start to focus on what you're grateful for, it just creates more and more of it. So pretty soon you've got more and more things working for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And we talked earlier. You're in Portland, Oregon. I'm in Ohio. It's Ohio this time of year is just back and forth. One day it's cold. It snowed a couple of weeks ago. Today it's 85 degrees, and it's sunny. So, and I love the warmth. So I think sometimes, I hate the winter, but because of the winter, I love the spring so much more.
Yep. That's the contrast, right? I mean, that's what I believe, is that contrast really helps us to learn what it is that we need to learn. So it's like, if you have times where you don't see the sun, it really makes you understand what it's like to see it. Whereas if you have a lack of love, you really, appreciate it when you learn to have love, or, you experience love.
Yeah, it's funny, as we're talking about this, I was speaking with someone a few weeks ago, and they said their father is from Cuba. And they said, they never talk about the weather. And it was interesting because it's always, I guess, 80 degrees and sunny. Here, the first thing we do, we jump on a Zoom. I asked you, what's it like where you are? Because we're always, because it does change. And we can learn to, appreciate because of the contrast. We can learn to appreciate the nice weather.
Yes, exactly.
So, one of the questions that I asked you for example questions, and this is a great one. It's like, what is real happiness? So what is it? What is real happiness?
Yeah. So what real happiness, what I mean by that is, I think that a lot of times people don't feel happy because they're placing their happiness on something external. So it's like, if I get this job promotion, I will be happy. If I lose weight, I'll be happy. If I find my ideal partner, I'll be happy. But what happens is, when people reach these milestones, often they find, some reason I'm not happy. So now I need this other job. Maybe there's something wrong with my relationship. So I think that people often think that external things will bring them happiness, but the reason why external can't bring us real happiness is that it's not sustainable. So I mean, what happens when your relationship ends, when you lose the job, or you don't get the job, or you gain your weight back, right? And so real happiness is about what you and I were talking about earlier. It's about learning that it comes from within, that it's about you understanding your truth, that the understanding that your conditioning is not your truth. So in order to find real happiness, you first have to understand that there is such a thing as conditioning, and that it isn't you, and all those messages that you've gotten from your conditioning about how you have to be in order to be accepted and loved isn't valid. And so when you understand that, then you can begin creating your relationship with yourself. You can become your own best friend, your partner, your mother, your father, and show up for yourself in all the ways that you need, and love and accept yourself as you are, regardless of what you're doing in your life. You're always there for yourself. That's real happiness.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about that earlier. You were saying how the ego sometimes will kind of beat us up, right? And tell us that I guess we are not good enough or our circumstances aren't good enough. And so as long as you're listening to that, you can't ever really truly be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing that's hard. I know that what I'm talking about, I make it sound like, oh, it's so easy. Just find your true self and love yourself. But I understand that the conditioning can be so profound, right? I understand. And the reason why I am so patient and I believe that anybody can um, find real happiness is because I've done it and I've come from a very far place in terms of finding it. And I know that even though it can be hard work and it takes practice to be willing to retrain your neural pathways, and it takes time to willingness to sit with yourself. I know that people can find it, and I know that anyone can do it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's easy. And I guess that's the thing, and sometimes for us that have this similar message, people look at you and say, well, it's not that easy. I just can't be grateful all the time. And I just can't make myself happy because you can't just think your way out of it, but there is work you can do. There are techniques, there are things that you can do. And the first thing is understanding what's making you unhappy.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. As humans, we all have ups and downs, and so even though I understand all of this, and I feel that I can be in joy most of the time, I also still have times where I'm grumpy or I fall off and do things I don't like. But the point is that I understand that and I show up for myself in those times, and I know that I can't control external, but I can work with myself to be okay internally, and I can support myself in the ways that I need when external isn't going the way I want.
Yeah.
We can
Well,
all do that.
yes, and I think that's an important thing to say because people might hear this message and say, well, if you're saying if I do this, I'll be happy all the time and nothing will ever bother me. And I'm assuming that's not what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that's the funny thing, that I've found. I've been doing my own this work for over 20 years now, and I think I thought when I started on this spiritual journey that like one day it would be like that, where you're like, oh, things don't bother you, or you're just happy all the time. But actually, that doesn't happen, and it's kind of a little bit of a letdown when you realize that life continues to be challenging, and people continue to sometimes be mean, or things happen the way that you don't want them to all the time. But what changes, it's still painful, but what changes is that you understand that um, how you show up for yourself, and you understand that it doesn't get to mean anything about you, that you define your truth, your worth, your lovability. Nothing else external gets to, and nothing else external, regardless of how hard it is, gets to take anything away from you unless you let it.
Yeah, I think the thing is, I haven't found it disappointing yet, but because the thing is, I'm like I think we're here to learn, and I think we're here to deal with these challenges, and there are going to be things that we don't like. The world is still a crazy place, and I hope I never get to the point where I don't let those things upset me in some way. That what I don't, because I think our emotions are all important, and that emotion of anger if you see injustice, I hope I always have that. But it's how I deal with it. It's how I sit with it. It's how much I let it affect me and how long I let it affect me.
Exactly. Yep. And that's the reason why happiness is in our control, right? It's because we you're right. Like things are going to bother us or upset us, but it's up to us how we manage that and how we take care of ourselves, how we show up for ourselves, and how we let it impact others, because it's our responsibility to take care of our own emotions and such so that they don't go on to others.
Right, right. Well, and the thing is, I guess, and again kind of maybe putting words in your mouth, but we don't have to be happy about the situation, but we can learn to deal with it. And I read a book many years ago by Viktor Frankl, talking about man's search of meaning, and I'm like, if this guy can be okay in those conditions, then I should be able to be okay in any conditions that I'm in. And that's the thing, you're not happy about the conditions, but you learn how to deal with it, I guess.
Yep, exactly. Acceptance is one of our keys to freedom, right? That's what it's about, is like we don't have to like it, but then that's our choice. We can either not like it and be mad about it and let it ruin our day or our life, or we can accept it and be learn to be okay and have a good life or a good day. It's up to us, really.
Well, let's talk about acceptance. So, how's acceptance different from, say, giving up?
Good one. Well, I believe that giving up is about closing yourself off. So it's like giving up is kind of not really being open or feeling it. Whereas I feel acceptance is maintaining your openness. So allowing yourself to feel however you feel about whatever it is you're accepting. That's what I think.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I know you say acceptance is your key to freedom, and I think for people, they might well say, "Well, of course, I have to accept what is." But what's your experience been about people accepting what is?
Um, it's hard for people to accept what is. I think that's one of the hardest things. I think that it's really hard for people to kind of get over that things don't often go our way, especially like in our society. We're really built on a society where people are like, you work hard, you get this, like you want to, you have goals and you achieve them. And so we're kind of set up to kind of have goals and expectations. And when we don't, it doesn't go exactly the way we want, people feel like failures, or they feel like life doesn't like them, or God doesn't like them, And so I think it's hard for people to understand that. And what I say is that it's okay to have goals. It's okay to have expectations. Of course, you need them to be successful. The piece that you want to work with is your attachment to them. Because interestingly enough, I'm sure life is constantly moving and constantly up and down. It hardly ever goes exactly how we want it to. And so if we can kind of just understand that and know that, yeah, we have our goal, but it might, you know, like look differently than we originally set out. If we can be flexible in that way and accept it as we go, then we are much happier, and we're going to be much more successful too. And it could end up being way better than it was going to be anyway.
Yeah, that's a great lesson. That's a lesson that took me a long time to learn, because in my career I always had goals. I want to do this. I want to get to this level in a certain company or whatever. And then when I didn't get it, then I was like, oh well, this is terrible. But then you find out later on, this actually worked out better, for me, because I didn't get that, or even I even get fired from a job. And it turned out to be a great thing. But at the time, I certainly wouldn't have thought it was a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way as you do in my life. In the beginning of my life, I used to sort of be a type A personality and would be like very driven and goal oriented. And now, as I've done more and more work, I understand that, I'm just accepting that how things go or how they are going to go. And the more open we can be, that it's just allows us to, I think, have a lot more success. It's sort of trusting, I think, that things will work out for you in the best way possible. And I think being able to have that belief is very helpful.
We'll get back to grief to growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.grief2growth.com, or text growth, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grief2growth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF2GROWTH to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Yeah, I love what you said there, but it's again one of those things that some people might say, well, why should I trust that things are going to work out for the best? That might be a question someone comes back at you with.
Yeah. And what I would say is, okay, well, if you want to focus on the worst, you can do that. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel good? And so it's like you have a choice. You can choose either one. If you want to feel bad and focus on that it might not work out, you can do that. But it's going to make you feel bad, and you're not gonna. It's not going to feel better than trusting. So you might as well be open to what you want and trust that it'll work out, because that feels better, you know?
Yeah, I wish someone had told me this about 40 years ago, because I think a lot of us think, well, I'm just being a realist. I'm just being a realist. Things never work out for me. Things don't work out. The universe is a cold, unaccepting, uncaring place, and I'm just going to live in that truth. And so I think people feel like, in a sense, sometimes they're just being realistic when they think that.
Yeah, and they're being miserable, right? I mean, and this is the thing, is that what we focus on is what we create. So, and it does take people, I meet people like that. I have clients who start out like that. And it does take people a while to begin to shift in that way. But what happens is, when we're focusing on what's working and we're focusing on what could go wrong, that does create our reality. And so that's what your reality will look like. And it'll keep proving to you over and over that things don't work out for you. But what you want to do is just begin to be willing. That's all it takes. And open, and just begin to move over in the other direction, to just like, this is when I would prescribe gratitude practice. All right, let's just start with that one step each day. So begin to focus on what's working, and whether people believe it or not, there's at least a few things working in their life, right?
Yeah.
And so you start with that. Just start focusing on what's working, and then let's start to explore, well, how do you want it to look? This is how it's going, but how do you want it to look? Let's explore that. And then I would have them begin to practice focusing on how they want it to look. And if they're really struggling with that, then I would give them the phrase like, well, wouldn't it be great if it could go that way? So then that kind of helps their ego. The ego doesn't like definitives. Like, if you're like, well, this is how it's going to go, then it's easy for them to say, well, my ego goes the opposite way. But if you say something like, well, wouldn't it be great? It allows your ego to not get so rigid, because it's like, I'm not saying it's going to, I'm just saying, wouldn't it be great?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's one of the things about human nature is that, and this is not a bad thing about human nature, it's evolutionary, is we focus on the negative. We focus on what's wrong. It's a great way to get fixed things. It's a great way to avoid danger. And back when we were running around, running from saber-toothed tigers, it was really important to recognize, danger right away and to react to it. But I think now we've kind of overdeveloped that thing, and as you've so well said, it makes us miserable. And there's always so many things that are going right in our life. I don't care who you are. I literally challenge anybody to tell me that there's nothing going right in their life right now.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, sometimes people think that, but we can't help them find it, though, because there is just the fact that they're awake and alive, that they're able bodied, or that they have a home, or, there's so many things that could be working. The interesting thing about what you were just saying is that people really like to cling to that, because they think it prepares them for bad. They think that it keeps them from being disappointed. They think that it somehow, by going over all that could go wrong, they're kind of keeping themselves safe. But that's actually not true. It actually just causes you anxiety. It causes you suffering, and you're going to be disappointed whether you prepare yourself or not. So why not focus on how you want it to go? Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah, great example that when I was younger, I hated flying. I had this terrible anxiety about flying. And I realized after I was in therapy, I thought that my anxiety was actually keeping the plane in the air. And that if I relaxed, then the plane would crash, which is a ridiculous notion. But I think a lot of times we do. We have this kind of superstitious thing that if I think things are going to go well, not only am I going to be disappointed, I'm going to make things go badly. So I have to always be on the defense.
Yeah, it's exactly right what you're saying. Yeah. And so we really want to get the message out to people that, oh my gosh, no, you're causing yourself so much undue anxiety and suffering. Like, you could be free from that and focusing on what you want and what works, because that is not helping you one bit. In fact, it's actually making it worse.
Yeah, well, this is the thing I would always tell people. The one thing that we do know is, as you said, you're making yourself miserable now. We don't know if you can really change the world with your mind or not. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But we do know you're making yourself miserable by always worrying about what's going to go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, and the thing is that one of the things I tell people to ask themselves is like, when, anxiety is future based. And so when we bring ourselves back to the present moment, that is the only place that we're free. And so you can ask yourself in that moment, is there anything wrong in this moment? And
Yeah.
that's a good question to ask yourself, because usually, for the most part, I would say there isn't. If there is, then you can ask yourself, well, is there an action I can take? And if,
Yeah.
if there's no action, then you can say, oh my, I'm sorry, I had that off, but it's sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I've actually come to that question myself. And it's a question I've used to cope with my anxiety, because 99.9% of the time in this moment, there's nothing wrong. People, if you ask them that, they'll go to the future. They'll say, well, this could happen or that could happen. But if you bring them back to this moment, the moment that you're sitting right here in the chair, what do you really need right now? And that's a great exercise.
Yeah, because what we find is that when we're right here in this moment, everything is okay and we're free. If we're in the future, we're anxious. If we're in the past, we're depressed. But here, we're free.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about acceptance of circumstance. Let's talk about self-acceptance, because I think that's another thing people struggle with, is just accepting who we are.
Yeah. I mean, that's the key, right? Is learning to love and accept ourselves just as we are. And I think, as you and I have been talking about, often our conditioning that we get from our parents and the world, we learn that sometimes how our needs or how we are is somehow not okay. And then that's what we're working with. So when you're talking about self-acceptance, is that we have to unlearn that piece or get away from that, because our society really will send messages to us about what is ideal or most acceptable, and people feel if they don't fall into those categories, that then they're not right. And so it's understanding that nothing external gets to define us, nothing external gets to determine our lovability or our worth. And that's why that spiritual piece that you and I've been talking about, that at our core, our truth is divine, and that we are love and we are enough just as we are.
Right. So how do we get to start to accept ourselves? What are some things we can do?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the biggest things I think is for people to begin getting to know their true self again, to begin to understand that who they really are beyond the conditioning. And so I always like to introduce meditation to people, and I like people to begin to sit with themselves in their body, to learn to begin to get away from the chatter in their mind, from their conditioning. And so that's often scary for people, and people are often like, oh, that's hard, I can't sit with myself, I don't have time. But here's the thing, it is hard for everyone. The Buddha called our mind the monkey mind for a reason, because all of our minds are monkey minds until we sit with them and train them. And here's the other thing I tell people: you have 5 minutes. If you tell me you don't have 5 minutes, I know that isn't true, because everybody can create 5 minutes in their day. And that's the most that I like prescribe to people, is 5 minutes at a time, so that it feels really easy and doable. And so just start by doing 5 minutes. And I know that isn't a lot, but it's like more about creating the habit, more of beginning to get comfortable sitting with yourself, getting comfortable being quiet. There's a lot of healing, and coming to love yourself is learning to be uncomfortable. It's like learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable, that we can tolerate pain. And sometimes, sitting with ourselves in quiet can feel intolerable or painful, or sitting with our own pain can feel intolerable. But that's our key, is learning to tolerate that.
Yeah. And when people tell me that they don't have time, and it's a phrase that I try not to even use anymore. I'll say that I haven't taken the time to do something, not that I don't have the time. We all have the same amount of time in a day, and we prioritize our time. So what I tell people is, certainly you're worth it, right? Aren't you worth spending 5 minutes on? Because we spend all of our time running around doing other things and not enough time on self-care. And one thing I love about what you're saying is, and we're both saying this is not necessarily easy. This is not something that you're just going to fall into. This is work. And that's why what your book, I assume, tells us is how do we do this?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things that I've recently come across that makes so much sense to me, and now it's one of my favorite things, is that self-discipline is like the biggest act of self-love. Because if you think about it, that is so true, because it's not easy to always make the choices that we need to make to honor ourselves or love ourselves. But taking the discipline to do the things that we know are going to help us get where we need to go is what it takes. And that, I think, is the number one reason why people don't heal or people don't find real happiness, is because people don't want to do anything different, or they don't want to practice. They don't want to take the steps. And I get it, but it doesn't have to be hard. It's like we can do it. That's why my book is the way that it is it's like, I know that things have to be very small and easy for people to be able to do them. And it has to be consistent in terms of them being able to stay motivated and to make the changes that they need to make.
Yeah, I like your 5 minutes of meditation, because so many people start off meditation. They just try to sit on the cushion for half an hour, which is almost impossible to do. And they'll do it once or twice, and then they'll give up, like, well, this is terrible. So if you start off with something sustainable, like a simple gratitude practice, like you mentioned earlier, or 5 minutes a day of doing meditation, or maybe 5 minutes a few times a day, maybe you can find a way to incorporate that into your day, then you can start to have some success, and then it feeds on itself. And that's what I've discovered, and hopefully that we can get this message across to people. It may seem hard at first, but then we think of habits as bad things. They're bad habits, but you can also create good habits.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the other things about creating real happiness, A to Z, the book, is that is like a lot of different options in terms of things people can do. And my hope is that people will find one or two that resonate for them, that really feel like, oh, these are doable. I can add these to my life. And then they begin to make them a part of their life. Because here's what I know. Our world is such that if we don't create practices or things that keep us on our path, keep us where we want to be going, we will be pulled off. We will be pulled off over and over, or not, just not be on our path if we don't have things that inspire us or keep us on the path that we're on.
Yeah, well, we've talked about earlier that the world is I think it's a crazy place. I think I don't think too many people would argue that with me. And for us to stay on our path, I love that image. We've got to be disciplined. We've got to be focused, and people. Hopefully people will accept that message, because I think it's really important we have to create our own happiness, and that's why I love you title the book Creating Real Happiness, because it doesn't just happen to us. It doesn't just fall out of the sky. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not going to be brought to us by our circumstances. We could win the lottery tomorrow. A lot of people think that's the key to their success, but their key to happiness. But look up what happens to lottery winners.
Yep. Yeah, I know. Not most of the time, it does not change their life for the better, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, another big subject that you talk about, and this is a tricky one for people, is forgiveness. So tell me about forgiveness and why that's important.
Yeah, this is a hard one for people, and I often have clients who feel resistant to this. And here's why: it's because often people think that when we talk about forgiveness, it means that we're saying it's okay if people treated them wrong or abuse them. But when we're talking about forgiveness, we are not saying that somebody's bad behavior is okay. And we're not saying that you deserved it or anything like that. I believe that self-forgiveness is about self-love. And so when we're not forgiving someone, we're holding resentment, anger, pain in our body. And that's causing us suffering, only us suffering, not the person who hurt us. The pain that we have in our body is only impacting us.
Now that you're here at Grief to Growth, I'd like to ask you to do 3 things. The first thing is to make sure that you click notifications, and subscribe to make sure you get updates from my YouTube channel. Also, if you'd like to support me financially, you can support me through my tip jar at grief2growth.com. It's grief, the number 2, growth.com/tip jar. Or look for tip jar at the very top of the page, or buy me a coffee at the very bottom of the page, and you can make a small financial contribution. The third thing I'd like to ask is to make sure you share this with a friend through all your social media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. Thanks for being here.
And so when we choose to work on forgiveness, we're releasing that from our body and freeing ourselves up, which is an act of self-love. And the steps that I think are important to truly be able to forgive. The first is the work that you and I have been talking about, is that first we have to do our own self-love work. We have to understand our own worth, our own truth, so that we know, regardless of what happened to us externally or happens to us externally, that it doesn't get to mean anything about us or define anything about us. So it's important for us to know that truth before we can work on detaching from other people's behavior. Because the second piece of forgiveness is, we can call it empathy or understanding how somebody may have shown up in the way that they do. So it's like, why do you think this person who hurt you showed up in the way that they did? And so, taking the time to think, well, okay, I can see why their behavior might be that way, understanding how they were raised or their circumstances. And then, or maybe you don't understand, or you can't fathom it. But what you can understand is that this person's behavior, whether it feels like it or not, is not personal. It actually has nothing to do with you. It's about their conditioning, their life circumstances, and it isn't personal. And so it doesn't get to mean you're not lovable, you're not worthy, it doesn't get to mean anything about you. And so those are the keys in terms of really, truly being able to rid yourself of pain that another person has caused you.
Yeah, I think what you just said there is so well. Everything you just said there is really, really important. But to not take it personally, that's one of the 4 agreements, and I love the 4 agreements. They're so simple, but they're so profoundly true. We tend to take things that people do as like they did this intentionally to hurt me. Someone cut you off in traffic. Well, no one's really trying to cut you off in traffic. Now, maybe they were rude, maybe they weren't paying attention, maybe they were distracted, but they weren't trying to cut you off. But that just seems to be the way that our ego reacts to things, right? I guess our ego is thinking, I'm going to protect you from this happening to you again. And that can block that forgiveness by when we say, oh, I know that they meant to hurt me. I know that this person's out to get me.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that happens all the time. And has a lot to do with our own work, right? Especially like when we get into our interpersonal relationships, if we have blocks or things we haven't healed, then that's what we see in the world. So like if somebody doesn't show up in the way we want, we think, oh, well, they're showing up in that way because they don't love me, or they were, like you were saying, they're trying to hurt me, but really everybody is truly showing up the best that they can in any given moment based on their current conditioning and circumstances. And I know this is not a popular thing that I'm saying, but I do believe it's true. And so it's like, if somebody hurts you, it's about their skills, their conditioning, whatever's going on in their life. And it really isn't about you.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because there was a guy I used to debate with years ago on the internet, and he would always say that no one truly does evil, that everybody does the best they can with what they know, with where they are, and there's conditioning and their circumstances. And I know that you're right. People push back against that, and they say, no, there are truly evil people in the world. And there are people in the world that do things that are evil. That's definitely true. But in their minds, they're justified. And we all do things in our minds are justified, and we're all imperfect beings. So as you said, as we do this work on ourselves, and as we learn to accept ourselves, the good and the bad, then we can look at other people and say, well, maybe they don't have the skills that I have. So maybe that's why they did what they did.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do also believe that people do evil things, or that there are, really evil things that happen out there. But I also, like you said, I believe that it's based on their stuff that, they're like you were saying, they most likely believe they're justified in it, or, something to that effect. It has to do with their conditioning and their life circumstances. Yeah, sorry, I can't remember the second part of what you asked me something.
Well, I was just saying that I think that, I was just agreeing with you about people acting at the best that they can. That I think is one of the keys. You talked about the two keys of forgiveness. That's one of the keys of forgiveness, is understanding that people are not out to get you. They're people don't sit around all day thinking about how they can hurt you. And the other thing is, as you said, doing the self-love and acceptance, which allows us to have that empathy for other people. But I think the really, really important thing about forgiveness, and I grew up in a Christian tradition, because sometimes people think forgiveness is about the other person. And I need to let go of it because God told me I needed to forgive, and I don't want to hold things against other people. But, you said it so well, when you're holding on to anger and resentment and all that stuff, you're just hurting yourself. The other person's probably not even thinking about you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think if we can shift it, reframe it to it being about us, it's about loving ourselves, letting go of that. And it has nothing to do with that person. Why continue to abuse yourself or create pain for yourself? Like, you're continuing the abuse in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
By allowing yourself to carry that around or hold on to that. So letting go of that frees you.
Yeah. And I've seen people forgive some, incredible things, and people will look at them and say, well, aren't you a saint because you did that? But again, from the perspective that we're speaking of, that's an act of self-love. That's an act of self-care.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's such a gift we could give to ourselves. All these things you and I are talking about in terms of not taking things personally and letting go of, holding on to negative emotions. It's just, that is a gift to us. It allows us to free up space in our body for higher vibrational energy, right? So higher level emotions. And then that impacts the world, because then when we show up in the world, we're showing up at these higher levels, and we're then able to lift others up or help others. And so it's just all of this is really just, helpful to us and others.
So, tell me more about your book. So how is it laid out? When people get the book, what can they expect to find?
Yeah. So the book it's a very approachable book. I did it that way on purpose. So, because as we talked about before, people, I think, get overwhelmed by things that are too big. And so I wanted it to be very small. So it's small. It's written in an A to Z format, which is why it's called Creating Real Happiness A to Z.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've done is kind of taken my favorite things that I have used over the years with myself and my clients, and I've put them into this little book. And each, it's like through the alphabet. So, starting with A through Z, and you can do it in any way that you want. You can read it cover to cover and read each entry and do the exercise. Every entry has an exercise or a practice for you to do. And or what you can do is just kind of use it every day and flip to a page and read something and do the exercise. You can do one a day, or you can choose, do one and work with it for a little while. Like, for example, one of my favorite things in terms of tools that we were talking about for self-love is mirror work. And I think that mirror work is something that you need to do on an ongoing basis. So longer than one day. I would say if you want to try mirror work, do it a minimum of like 2 weeks, something like that, to practice helping yourself.
So tell me about mirror work.
Yeah. So mirror work, I think, is one of the most profound things you can do in terms of loving yourself, learning to connect with your true self. It's the other thing, aside from kind of meditation. Mirror work would be the other thing I would add to that. And so what it does is, like, you look yourself in the mirror, in the eye, you feel that in your soul or your heart center. And you'll notice everyone listening can try this, but we often avoid looking directly at ourselves in the mirror. It's possible to look at yourself in the mirror without really looking at yourself. But when you're doing mirror work, you make sure that you really look yourself in the eye, and then you choose a phrase. So, like, most likely I would want somebody to start with, like, I love you, or you are so lovable, something like that. And you say it to yourself like 10 times in a row in the mirror. And what will happen when you look at yourself and you say that, it will trigger your ego. Your ego might talk back to you, like, say, no, no, I don't. Or, oh God, look at your eye wrinkles, or, oh God, you look awful today. It will stir your ego up. And so that's kind of one of the ways you can kind of begin to see your truth versus your ego, right? And so
Right.
you notice that your ego gets stirred up, but you continue to look at yourself, and you continue to tell yourself that you love yourself, and you just keep focusing on that. But if you do that every day for 2 weeks, I promise you're going to begin to soften. You're going to begin to shift. You're going to begin to feel more connected to yourself and more separate from your ego.
Yeah, I like that. I like that work that you're talking about, because I think it's really important that we understand that neither one of us is saying that the ego is our enemy, because I don't believe, I agree with you 100%. We can't get rid of our ego. We don't want to get rid of our ego, because we cannot be human beings on this planet without an ego. But our ego is kind of like the overprotector. It's like, okay, you need to calm down. Okay, you need to just take a back seat, because our true self, knows better. So we kind of integrate the ego. And as you were saying that, I'm like, I don't want to look at myself in the mirror. That sounds terrible. But it's the same thing when you talk to people about meditating. People say, I don't want to be alone with my thoughts for 5 minutes, because my thoughts are crazy. You don't understand what my mind is like. But you've got to face that uncomfortable thing to kind of push through it, and to say things like, I love you to myself, or you're worthy, and then think about, why does that make me so uncomfortable? You could say it to somebody else, but can you say it to yourself?
Yeah, that's why it's so powerful, because we don't do it. We just don't look at ourselves. And it's an interesting thing how, we just don't really talk to ourselves in a loving way. Or I often have clients say, it feels so weird to talk to myself. And this is what I say to them. You're talking to yourself all the time. It's just that you don't recognize it, because it's so conditioned that it just flies by. It feels weird because you're now, shifting it to be more positive. And so it sticks out. It's only uncomfortable because it's new. You're always talking to yourself. It's not weird to talk to yourself.
And you're probably calling yourself stupid and dumb and fat. This is another thing that I realized a little while ago. I was saying terrible things to myself, and things I wouldn't say to another person. So I stopped it. I was like, no, you can't say that to yourself, because we believe it. And we have this mind, this thing inside of us that tells us what a terrible person that we are. And we can't stop it. So I love the fact that you're helping people with really practical ways to do this, ways to start making that shift towards the higher self, or towards the true self.
Yeah. Thank you. It's so important. I mean, really, I want everyone to love themselves. I want everyone to be happy and at peace, and to have the freedom from suffering, because it's our divine right. We deserve that. And I think what an amazing world we would have if we were all walking around in that, happy. It would just make our world such a much more pleasurable place to be.
Well, that's the other thing that, because again, we might think that this is selfish. And again, from my tradition growing up, they would have said, oh, this is such a selfish thing, because, a lot of the Eastern traditions are about turning within. But the thing is, it's not a selfish act. It's actually a gift to the world, because if you show up as a better person, and everybody shows up as a better person, we'll have a better world.
Yep, that's true. I mean, and the thing is, we are all connected, whether people believe that or not, which is why, we impact each other so much. So it's like when you're around somebody who vibrates at a really high energetic level, they can literally lift somebody who's at a lower vibration up just by being in their presence. And that's because we're connected. So it's like, we are helping people, it's like, and when we are shining our light, we're reminding people of their light, or of who they are. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stephanie, tell people where they can find you, where they can find out more about you, and just let people know how to connect with you.
Yeah, well, I have a website. So Stephani Grace, my name doesn't have an E on the end. So it's just www.stephanigrace.com, StephaniGrace. And then I also am very active on Instagram, and you can find my Instagram by searching for Stephani Grace, no E on the end. I do a mindful minute most days, either a video or a post, just to kind of help people, like we were talking about, stay on the path, to have a little, little reminder or daily inspiration. And those are my main ways. And then also, of course, you can buy my book, Creating Real Happiness A to Z, and that's available at most places now.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, it's been a pleasure meeting you. Anything you'd like to say before we wrap up today?
Gosh, well, it has been, one of the great things about writing this book has been that I get to meet amazing people like you. It's been so fun to come and, talk with you. And it's my absolute passion to talk about this kind of stuff. So it's just
Yeah.
such a treat for me to come and talk with like-minded humans and to get this sort of message out in the world for others. And hopefully we are inspiring people and helping people to know, like, oh yeah, I can do these small things and maybe begin to change my life.
Absolutely. Well, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Don't forget to hit that big red subscribe button, and click the notify bell. Thanks for being here.